Fukushima Volcano Astrophotography. I'm not sure if that is a phrase or a collection of nouns, but regardless, it certainly captures the essence of this episode. Welcome to Astrophotography Japan. If you have seen any of my previous videos, then you know that I am always looking for interesting opportunities to venture away from the Boreal Class 7+ light-polluted environment of Yokohama for darker skies. And during a recent 3-day holiday weekend in September, I did just that. For this trip, I traveled up to the Fukushima area for the first time. I had never been there before. Of course, Fukushima is a bit infamous due to the magnitude 9 earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear environmental disaster along the coast in 2011. But it is also famous for onsen, or hot spring resorts, beautiful mountains, and some of the best fruits and sake in Japan. There are nearly 2 million people that live in the prefecture, but only about 300,000 in Fukushima city itself. The city center is 45 kilometers, or about 28 miles from the Pacific coast. Getting there is easy and direct by using the bullet train, or Shinkansen, from downtown Tokyo. It only takes about 90 minutes and costs about $75 one way. For this trip, I joined up with the Tokyo ET Contact CE5 group again. On the first night, we had 11 participants at Sengen-no-Mori mountain, which is very famous for UFO sightings. On location, I did enjoy a somewhat cheesy UFO museum, all in the name of fun. We also hiked up to the top of Sengen-no-Mori mountain, guided by little stone statues of ET marking the way. The mountain is supposedly rich in quartzite and granite, and hence a proposed energy spot for UAP activity. That night was cloudy with occasional fog, but there were brief moments of clear skies as the changing weather rapidly marched through. Unfortunately, we saw no unusual visual sightings. The next day, we drove along the Bandai Azuma Skyline to Mount Azuma, southwest of Fukushima. The Skyline Drive offers some spectacular views amid the mountainous highlands. And where the road crests over the mountain range at more than 5,000 feet is located the Jododaira rest house and other facilities. From the rest stop, one can walk up to the rim of the Azuma-Kofuji stratovolcano, whose crater, or caldera, peaks at 1,707 meters, or approximately 5,600 feet above sea level. Compared to the hot and humid climate below us in Fukushima, at these altitudes the temperature was cool and less humid. Kofuji, meaning Little Fuji, is an active volcano. All around that area, the ground has cracked and puffed many times in the previous centuries, and some areas still constantly emit noxious gases and yellow streams of molten sulfur. If hydrogen sulfide, the rotten egg smell, bothers you, then you may not want to visit this mountain. From the rest area parking lot to the rim of the volcano, it is a 15-minute ascent up a wooden staircase for a view down into the caldera. The size and depth are reminiscent of Mount Fuji, but as the name implies, perhaps a little smaller. I suspect it might take an hour to walk around the rim, but we elected to save our time and energy for the night's activities. From up here, you can see the gas plumes on the opposite mountainside and the basin area and marshland below, where there is an information house, a rest house with a restaurant and souvenir store, bathrooms, and a building with a telescope dome. The domed building is the Jododaira Astronomical Observatory, and to my delight, the front door was open for public visitors. Inside, on the ground floor, there was a very nice display of photographs, models, astronomical information, and history. There were even some telescopes, including a beautiful fluoride glass Takahashi refractor. I actually saw 3 other Takahashi refractors later. Being more than curious, I introduced myself to the manager, who was sitting in an adjacent office. He keenly inspected my astrophotography hobbyist business card. In Japanese, it is called a meishi. And we chatted a bit. He recognized most of the equipment I owned on the photograph on my meishi. It was then that I knew I was dealing with an astronomer and not just an office manager. His name was Naoki Toyoshima, and he kindly offered me and my 2 curious companions a behind-the-ropes private tour. At first, he showed us this 100mm refractor dedicated to solar astronomy. He even rolled back the roof, and we got to look at some solar prominences for a few moments before the clouds rolled by. Afterwards, we headed up to the dome to see the main attraction. It was a 40-centimeter aperture Schmidt-Cassegrain professional scope. That is almost 16 inches. Its focal length was 5.2 meters. Attached to it as well was a 15-centimeter refractor with a 1.8 meter focal length. The entire system was most impressive. It was designed and built by a custom Japanese manufacturer named Mitaka. Toyoshima-san spoke very highly of this company, calling it the best in Japan. Indeed, I really appreciated the kind and special consideration accorded us by Toyoshima-san. The tour was unexpected and really made my day. After that, we explored the marshland area behind the observatory at the back of the overflow parking lot. Here there was some level ground among the weeds and bushes that looked to be a good viewing place. That area was nestled between several mountain ridges, so it was not possible to see the horizon in any direction, but that did not matter. The Fukushima forecast was for clouds all night, but at this altitude in the mountains to the southwest, for most of the night we had clear skies. About mid-afternoon, after all that prior reconnaissance, our plan was to find and check into our hotel accommodations. Our group had pre-reserved an interesting forest cabin at a place named Log Cabin Stellaport Youth Hostel. Yeah, I know I'm not exactly a youth anymore, but I am young at heart, I believe. This place was near to the Takayu Onsen village area, where we could enjoy the public bathhouses featuring extremely hot natural volcanic spring waters, which we did on the next morning. The Stellaport log cabin was very nice. It easily accommodated all 5 of us travelers, and it also had a main lodge that, to my surprise, was decorated with old astronomy gear and many wall-hanging images of galaxies and nebulae. It turned out that the owner was an avid astrophotographer, and a good one at that. It's my personal guess that his photos were taken without the use of any filters, which is obviously possible under these dark mountain skies. They looked very natural. There were over 30 photos of many popular deep sky objects amid dense starry backgrounds displayed proudly. After unpacking and taking a brief nap, nightfall soon arrived, so we jumped back in Jenny's minivan and returned up to the summit again. About a 30-minute drive through the park with Mark, in the dark, along the winding Bandai Azuma Skyline Drive. On arrival, it was not difficult to find the predetermined viewing area in the marshland that we identified earlier. The CE5 ET contact group set up their circle there, while I set up my camera about 50 meters away. This night I brought the Canon EOS R8 camera and my 35mm Canon RF lens, which was not quite as wide as I needed, but nevertheless it was adequate. This was my fourth attempt to image the Milky Way, but tonight it was under the darkest skies I had ever experienced yet here in Japan. This volcano, Mount Azuma-Kofuji, is under Bortle Class 3 skies, and our viewing site was at an altitude of over 5,000 feet. Plus, there was no moon. The air was clean and clear and, not surprisingly, very transparent. Sitting there for hours in my foldable beach chair, I was mesmerized by the rich density of the stars. It was also quite confusing. There were too many stars to easily recognize the usual obvious constellations. I also saw at least 10 shooting stars, and that night, even after 4 hours of looking skyward, I was not bored or tired, only a little cold. This is my mobile mini tripod set up for the Canon R8 camera. The InterL tripod allows for a very wide base, giving very great stability. And the entire setup, including the tripod, extension, and ball head, all fit in a small travel case. Interestingly, during the CE5 contact event, I looked around with a thermal imaging camera to explore the skies and nearby grounds around us. There was one surprising observation. The anomaly I viewed was not registering heat, but rather it was very, very cold. In this photo you can see a dark circular spot that is much colder than the ambient 17-degree environment. Strange, isn't it? So how do you get something that large, almost 20 degrees cooler, showing up in one area? This perplexed us at the time, but later we determined that the cold spot corresponded to the telescope observatory dome. For your information, I learned that these types of inexpensive thermal imaging cameras appear to read metallic structures erroneously as very cold under most circumstances. It is some kind of artifact, but I do not know the actual science behind it. Nevertheless, I just wanted to share that interesting information. Now, regarding the Milky Way imaging, this snapshot is the first 15-second image file I took at 8:25 p.m. It is unedited. The sky was a bit cloudy at the beginning. About an hour later, though, it cleared, as you can see in this image taken at 9:27 p.m. This photo is also a single unprocessed image file. In itself, it is pretty spectacular to see that much definition of the Milky Way, don't you think? Notice, however, our group in the bottom of the photo is not visible at this exposure. As you know, the main event of the evening was the CE5 activity, so I didn't stage any foreground illumination. That would have been disturbing to the group. The organizer, Mark, runs a tight ship. However, we did take a group portrait that night. That is Mark on the left and me, JP Astro Guy, all the way on the right. Here is a time-lapse video made of 220 images, over 76 minutes taken from 8:25 p.m. to 9:41 p.m. The time-lapse was made in iMovie with the unprocessed images. I processed the resulting MOV movie file in iMovie software later to adjust the color, contrast, highlights, etc. This editing process is not the best way to make beautiful time-lapse movies. It is a fast and easy way with free software, but at the moment that is all I am capable of doing as I learn this new craft. And this is a final stacked photo composed of 10 subframes with the foreground image purposely overexposed to bring out the details. I stacked the photos in Sequitur and processed the resulting TIFF image file in GIMP. The second imaging set that I framed was angled upward and a little bit toward the northwest. My initial image for this second time-lapse set was recorded at 10:18 p.m. The settings were the same at 15 seconds each, f2 and ISO 5600. I took 148 images in this set, which lasted to 11:34 p.m. I would have kept going, but my battery was nearly expired, and I knew we were likely to wrap things up around midnight or 1 a.m., so I simply ended the imaging session then. This is a raw 15-second photo without any processing. Like before, I think it is pretty spectacular to see that much definition in a single frame, at least in my experience. I ran one of these photos through astrometry.net, and much to my surprise, it actually recognized the field of view and provided these detailed information. As you can see, this 35mm lens and full-frame camera combination covers about 58 by 39 degrees of sky. And the constellations in this region are shown here. It included a large portion of the Cygnus region and Sagittarius among other constellations. Here is the finer detailed version of this annotated photograph provided by astrometry.net. As before, I stacked about 10 frames in Sequitur to enhance the signal-to-noise to achieve a better rendition. That stacked TIFF image file was processed in GIMP and is shown here. I think that I have a lot to learn about Milky Way image processing, but this is my best effort. I also strung together the 148 images of this second set to create a time-lapse movie in iMovie. In one of my previous videos, I used QuickTime to do this time-lapse production. QuickTime and iMovie are both simple and inexpensive options. In this time-lapse, I did not eliminate any satellite artifacts with the Sequitur stacking software capabilities. At this time of night, no airplane or bright satellites were visible in the images. However, if you look very closely, you can see about 5 tiny points of light moving to the left or upper left in this image. Some are very fast and some are slow. These are not typical low-orbit commercial satellites or high-altitude geostationary satellites. What they are is impossible to know, but they are indeed very interesting. This night we wrapped up our group activity around 1 a.m. You can be sure I was wishing that I had a telescope and imaging equipment with me for the rest of the night. But that was not part of the plan, and besides, I had no transportation of my own. So we packed up, jumped in the minivan, and returned to the log cabin for a warm bed and much-deserved sleep. My visit to Fukushima was the 7th dark sky trip featured on my Astrophotography Japan YouTube channel. The 4 trips closer to Yokohama and Tokyo were all to Bortle Class 4 sky locations, but this trip to Fukushima was extra dark. It was also my first trip inland to a rugged and beautiful mountainous region for astrophotography. By the way, in case you did not know, the value of the Japanese yen is at the lowest point it has been since 1990. At the time of this recording, the exchange rate was close to 150 yen per US dollar. So if sightseeing in Japan is on your bucket list, right now it's a great value for international visitors. Of course, if you decide to come, please let me know. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your interest in Astrophotography Japan. I hope you enjoyed the video. As usual, let me wish you clear skies and time to enjoy it. My name is Paul Cheesegel, and I am an astrophotographer.